Kia ora koutou. It's great to be here. I want to thank Suze Reynolds and the Angel Association for the invitation and a chance to come here and really participate in what's been a fantastic event. I've just been super impressed by the network, the quality of the company as we're discussing here and the team. It's been brilliant. I guess I wanted to also acknowledge Marcel's observation about participation by Māori in the innovation space. It was great seeing our tuakana Ian Taylor's presentation yesterday, then one of our wahine toa, Miriana Lauri, and it's fun for me to be an American VC from Parihaka. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the areas that we invest in first to set and provide some context. We're an active investor in the agtech and food tech space. We're managing about $200 million, primarily doing Series A, Series B investment. And one of the reasons for, I guess, my part in this presentation today is talking about our work with corporate venture capital partners within our fund. I wanted to check first before I jump into this, how many of you have had a non-New Zealand MNC, either investor or acquirer of one of your portfolio companies? If I can just see a raise of hands, so a pretty good cross-section. And then secondly, how many of you have had the good fortune or maybe misfortune to invest in an agtech company? Okay, well, it's pretty good. Okay, well, I want to talk a little bit about the agtech scene first and what do we mean by agtech? And Finistere's sort of focus and our thesis, we're looking at technologies that can improve profitability and yield on farm, maybe an obvious thing. But secondly, and just as importantly, particularly since the Western world is moving really away from in fact, actually, it's definitely moved away from a surfeit to a surplus of calories. We're more concerned about the quality of those calories, perhaps, than we've ever been. Certainly, Big Food is concerned about what we want to consume and how do they provide it. And then lastly, but I think just as importantly, looking at the issue of sustainability in an authentic way. The consumer certainly cares about it, regulators care more about it, and so therefore technologists and companies like ours investing in technology in this space care more about it. So really, when we started a decade ago, agtech as a subset within venture capital really didn't exist. 10 years on, it's meaningfully different. This is a snapshot of just a really small number of some of the leading venture deals that have been done really over the last 5 years in the agtech space in North America, but includes companies like CropX that we're an investor in, whose technology originated, as some of you who are investors know, here in New Zealand. But in 2017, we're on track to see around $1.5 billion US invested in the agtech component. And if we expand that to food tech, including a lot of the work going on in the retail supply chain, it's closer to $4.5 billion. As an asset class, most of you will know US VC sort of hovers somewhere around the 50 billion mark in terms of annual investment. So it's starting to become noticeable in a significant area. I was talking to Ron this morning about it and talking about this from the Band of Angels perspective, how this has really become a hot and moving sector for everyone from angel investing through to the VC community. Randy Commissar, who you're going to hear from later on today, has got one of the hottest companies in this space, Farmers Business Network. And indeed, that enthusiasm is rubbing off on the corporate players as well. When we look at the range of investments, it's worth noting that agriculture is really a horizontal, not a vertical. It makes it quite interesting from a standpoint of generalist as well as specialist investors. There probably isn't a segment of technology or venture investing, or angel investing for that matter, that doesn't in some way intersect or cross over into the ag tech space. It's also interesting that really, if you think about the number of people engaged in agriculture, in the US, 1% feed the other 99. And if we think about, or if we certainly believe everything we hear and we see and we're reading around automation, around IoT, around big data, it may well be many less than 1% feeding the rest of the population. So this is becoming much more knowledge and technology intensive as an industry, and that trend is only going to continue to accelerate. The other interesting thing I think about the space is that there are many subsets within agriculture. This is a simplified version of it, but you'll see around the wheel, plant science, imagery, sensing technology, indoor ag, a really interesting area that we've made some fairly big bets in, and so on, crop protection, even marketplaces and fintech. We recently made an investment in a crop insurance services company. We did recently some work with PitchBook, the VC PE research firm some of you may have heard of. Pitchbook.com, there's actually a free downloadable version of the report that has a lot of the actual background data sitting behind this, including over 4,000 financing data set for the last decade of investments in agtech. So I won't bore you with all the details in great length now, but you can go and download the report and read it if you're interested. But each of these subset areas really is part of a taxonomy we built out with PitchBook to try and better understand how you describe this complex horizontal. And rather than sort of dwell on this, what I would say is that it's interesting to me when we looked at the subset out of Israel, and I take the point made by one of the speakers earlier about the dangers of trying to make direct comparisons with other countries. But it is interesting, Startup Nation Central just published a report concurrent with our data set that showed there were 460 Series A or later Israeli agtech startups. They have less than 20% of our GDP percentage in agricultural output, 8.5 million people. Even on a generous reading, there should be a couple of hundred agtech companies in the New Zealand economy, and there's nothing like that, which I see as a great opportunity, actually. It's one of the reasons why I'm here, beyond just Suze's charms and persuading me to come, is that I think there's great untapped opportunity here. We're about to make a first venture investment through our fund with your handsome award winner, Dean Tilliard, over there with his group, and we're really excited about the potential in this market. So, deal flow-wise, I think I've covered most of this, but it's just remarkable post-2013, the explosion that's occurred in the really last 4 or 5 years. That's when Monsanto, a small firm in the Midwest you may have heard of, bought Climate Corp for close to $1 billion. It's the first significant digital agriculture buyout. Since then, there have been nearly 700 digital ag plays that we at least have in our database that have been launched in the space. So, explosion in that area, really. And the other thing that's interesting, and I guess I want to segue now into the corporate venture piece, is the really significant uptick in identifiable corporate venture groups investing in the space, which not only covers some of the usual suspects you would expect to see, like MGV, Monsanto Growth Ventures, see they don't even want to use their name in the venture firm, Syngenta, but also Google Ventures has a dedicated agtech investment focus within their team, doing robotics, doing imagery, also in Farmers Business Network with Randy. Qualcomm in San Diego recently made their first agtech investment in an Israeli company called Prospera, and Bayer, of course, and many others. So it's been interesting to see that expansion of corporate venture investment, and I want to talk a little bit about what we're seeing, the good, the bad, and the ugly, if you like, in relation to that engagement. So our fund is predominantly financial, but about a third of the invested capital, or committed capital I should say, is from 3 strategic partners. And we set out with a plan, with a thesis actually, to recruit corporate partners, which I'll talk a little bit about what our objectives were and what we saw as the value of doing this. At one end of the spectrum, we looked at the major technology players, and so we ended up working through a process of getting Bayer to invest in the fund. They're now in the process of acquiring Monsanto, as probably some of you know, a reasonably sizable transaction. But they're ultimately a chemistry company, biology company, seed, crop protection, but they're also rapidly becoming a major data company as well too at the farm level. PepsiCo, you think of them as a beverages business, but they're the second largest food company in the world, backed by a much more diverse product portfolio that includes Frito-Lay, potato chips, and obviously also Quaker and the cereals business as well too. So 70,000 farmers growing in a $120 billion procurement supply chain business. So very significant player at the other end of the spectrum. And then Agrium, who may not be as much of a household name, But they're the world's largest ag products retailer, and now with the merger of potash, they're the largest integrated nutrients supplier to in fertiliser. So essentially we looked for partners that could work with us along the chain and which would help us engage in what we thought was importantly not just a North American or US, but a global ecosystem. Farm outputs at the farm gate globally total just under $3 trillion from a GDP standpoint. The access that we got to the LP's corporate capabilities was also another significant factor. So we do a reasonable amount of shared due diligence work when we're looking at new technologies with our corporate partners, and I'll talk a bit about the method we do that in a second. They get visibility to our deal pipeline. So we use a Salesforce-based platform. We're receiving deal flow around about between 1,500 and 1,700 deals a year from all sources. Some coming through social media and directly over our website platform, a lot of them coming from it. We've got a 14-person team now with locations in Dublin, Tel Aviv, Palo Alto, San Diego, and then a broader network than that. So they get access to seeing technology really before it hits them in many cases. Even with Bayer, who've had venture and tech scouting capabilities for over 20 years, and have $1 billion euro actually, R&D budget and about 6,000 people in the R&D function, they can't see everything. And then this is an important piece. One of the concerns we strike with entrepreneurs, with angel investors, is gosh, having these big companies in there, how do we know they're not going to see our technology early and try to pinch it? And so we're in effect acting as a buffer between the corporate and the entrepreneur. We're there and aligned with the entrepreneur to make a financial return. One of the most common discussions I have with our partners is, look, we're not interested in the financial return, absolutely. We're really more interested in getting strategic access to technology. And I say, well, let's just test that for a second. So you're okay if I lose all the money? Well, no, we want you to make a profit. So you do care about the financial return? Well, yes. And it's interesting because ultimately our partners look at that as table stakes, so they don't want you to lose it. So in that sense, actually, when we make financial investments, they are aligned around seeing a financial return. They do want to see a return. But really their strategic interest is in finding technologies that could really either add value to existing businesses or help create the business of the future for them. And so to do that, we've developed really formal partnering agreements with each of them. We have confidentiality agreements and firewalls around how information can flow between us, and we have a specific project team partner in each of these companies that works with us that essentially is also a buffer back to their corporate. So they don't want information leaking across the boundary either and contaminating things they're working on. So it's a delicate dance, but we found it's very effective. We get a perspective of what they care about, and we also get a chance to really test new technologies, new things coming into the pipeline before we make investments into them. So that sort of brings me on to the last piece, really, which is finding alignment. We have an advisory board to our fund. One of our advisors, when we were discussing whether to partner with corporates, said, in our experience, this hasn't worked out so well because all they really want to do is buy the intellectual property for cheap. And I went, okay, well, it's true that they'd rather pay as little as possible, and we and the entrepreneurs want them to pay as much as possible. But the nuance that's important is that, in effect, we're de-risking technologies in a way for them that, frankly, would really not be a good alignment with many of the corporates we work with. When we're thinking about how you explain the loss on an individual company versus wins and gains over the context of an entire portfolio, it's a tougher conversation in a corporate than it is in the context of a fund. So we might in fact have half of the fund not perform. That would be a pretty good outcome if we're honest and we think about portfolio wins and losses. But on the average, as long as the overall portfolio performs, there's top cover from a financial standpoint when the members of the innovation teams go back and talk to the CFO and say what's happening with the money. On the flip side, when we come to look at companies that are either going to work in some meaningful or engaged way with our portfolio companies, they're able to have that access without necessarily having the burden of being sought after for capital, at least in the initial rounds, because the fund is making that judgment and providing that. but they're able to come in and perhaps participate in follow-on rounds or in expansion rounds as we grow those companies. And in fact, Bayer became an LP of ours after buying 2 of our portfolio companies from our previous fund. So there is definitely that, not expectation, but there's that possibility. And just the final comment I'd make here, is that while it's difficult to do, and maybe it seems extremely obvious, the core tenet we've built really our corporate partnering relationships on is the idea of a win-win-win. We're not going to engage in a transaction or a facilitation with one of our strategic partners unless it's a win for the company, it's going to be a win for our fund, and ultimately, of course, they want to win for the corporate partner. They want to return beyond just the financial on the strategic capital they've put into the fund and are working with us. And it's actually not as difficult as it might sound to find those sorts of examples. One practical one I can give you that we just recently launched, we've got a trial going for one of our companies on over 100 farming sites with one of our strategic partners with the prospect to roll out to a network that has around 16,000 farms in their network, and where we have very specific and strict measurable milestones and technical goals. They've facilitated input from the business side, from the technical side, from legal. And of course, what we're finding is that portfolio companies coming to us are saying, well, we heard you got company X into Bayer or into Pepsi, could you help us do the same thing? And our network is not limited to that either. What we're also finding is by working with those corporates, even corporates that we have not got investor relationships with are saying, we like the model you're operating in, how can we find more ways to work together? So, and the final piece I'd note here is that, and how this relates back to what we're doing here with the Angel Association, is that we're really now interested in effect, finding ways in which we can co-invest with early stage groups that are building out a bigger pipeline of interesting tech, with the idea that we can trial, test it, and figure out whether it's market ready, whether the technology, the IP stacks up much more quickly than has maybe been traditionally the case within agtech. So trying to shorten that cycle time. So with that, I'll pause. That's probably enough.
Awesome. Thank you so much.